everybody went home a happy customer. So that's the best part.
Well, always good. Always good, man.
Yes. So with that,
Mhm.
let's get into what's obviously going to be probably the most one of the more difficult conversations you have to have. And because we cover aviation, obviously this is something that came up recently, and I do mean recently because recently, as of I guess it was Friday, and this one just came out of the blue. Cargo plane made an emergency landing in the ocean near Honolulu. And this article comes
Yeah.
to you from a couple of different sources. We have one from Business Insider. We also have the link in there for something else off of Yahoo News, and then there was also the
Mhm.
one from the YouTube Transair ditches off Honolulu, and I guess that's from the gentleman over there at their website. That would be which one is this? VAS Aviation, where we gotta.
Oh yeah, they do a
They
good
do a
job.
great job.
They do a good
We
job.
can't
Yeah.
play some of their content
Yep.
because it's
Yep.
copyrighted because it's what they created for themselves. We can just hit you guys up the
Yep.
link just because it does tie in some of the events that take place here and what is related to the article.
Yep.
And basically, we'll give you the rundown. Okay, the rundown is airplane taking off old 737-200 model. Now, when we mean old, we mean pretty freaking old, almost 46-year-old aircraft taken off directly out of Honolulu. And immediately upon takeoff, it said that it lost one of the engines. They declared it with ATC. There was a lot of
Mhm.
confusion. Okay, and I do mean a lot of confusion because at this time, ATC was also handling another Transair flight at the exact same time with a similar call
Yep.
sign. The air crew
Yep.
departed. They immediately made their report and basically saying we will have to return back to the airport at some point, but we do need to run some
Yeah.
checklists. At this point, they
Yep.
basically went off and said, "Look, we're not really ready to return back to the airport." There was further discussion, again, some chaos between another call sign and some misdirection there for a minute. But then basically, this air crew came back and said, "Look, we need to run some checklists. We can't maintain anything else than a 2,000 feet altitude." The entire duration of what took
Mhm.
place was about 15 minutes. They did lose visual sight of the airport, but they did follow the golden rules of aviate, navigate, communicate. However,
Mhm.
unfortunately, as in some of these cases with older aircraft and what goes on in the aviation industry, and just as we alluded to the other day, accidents will happen. This one has a happy but not great ending in the fact that the aircrew did have to ditch the aircraft. They did it 2 miles short of Honolulu International Airport. They did it in a manner in which both of the crew members survived, but they did sustain injuries.
Mhm.
Also, hats off to the captain because he actually refused the first egress and the first emergency crew and said, basically, take my FO first because this is what's going on. But there's a couple of things that we want to
Mhm.
highlight in this situation because a couple of months ago, Corey and I also covered the United that lost its engine in February coming out of Denver. Crew resource
Mhm.
management has been something that's been on the tip of the FAA since 121 rules really have had to go through I'd say, the impact of all the incidents that have happened that have written regulations in blood, right? That's unfortunate.
Yep.
This is what happens. But in this particular case, we do see some of the chronic man-made systemic problems inside of aviation, which is yes, the aircrew has to follow what they need to do. They make immediate communication, but unfortunately, in this particular case, the radio becomes the first initial issue of what this air crew is combating. And Corey and I had a conversation about this beforehand, and you suggested that there's a couple of issues there that you had with what you saw so far. So why don't you go ahead and throw your 2 cents in the hat there?
Yeah. Well, one of them that I just highlight just on what you said about some issues that come in when humans are involved. There's a few things like you can hear in the video that ATC gives the departing aircraft that has the problem, gives that departing aircraft some instructions of where to go, what altitudes to climb, which is expected of such an aircraft that just departed
Right,
an
right.
airport. Now, I was going to highlight that a little bit of expectation bias on ATC side. Because they it sounds, if I have it right, they sound like they just got the handover from tower for the aircraft to depart from that runway. They're expecting the aircraft to move over and then report, and then they're telling them where to go. It's a little bit of
Right.
just what happens, what the normal procedures.
Sure.
And instead, when that aircraft reports in, he immediately says to the effect, we have an issue. We're going to be heading 220. We need to do some troubleshooting, and we have an emergency, and we have engine out, or
All
we have
expected.
one of the engines, and they didn't acknowledge that, and actually later you'll hear a few more calls, as Mike said. There's a few times, it goes on for a while, but a few calls where actually even the point where I think it's Center again, where Center calls back and actually asks if they have, do you hear me? Radio check.
Yes, they did.
And the aircraft said the same thing. Aircraft, I think it was 809, radio check, and then ATC comes back and says, yeah, loud and clear, and then gave them more instructions. And then they said again, no, we have an issue.
True.
And then finally the ball drops, as it would say, and people are starting to realize what's going on. And you could see on some of the playback, if you look at the video that we linked, or some of it on your own from, let's say Flight Radar 24, you can see that they actually even designate, okay, the aircraft has emergency. You can see it, and then everybody's kind of, okay, all right, now we can do something.
We took a look at some of the other stuff that came off the website that we said earlier, and basically what ends up happening here is, like Corey said, that this air crew is almost immediate in saying that they have a problem, but there's something else that comes up a little bit further on that I'm going to touch on here, which is they immediately, after about 8 minutes of going through their entire checklist and doing what they're supposed to be doing, they come back with this very, very odd call, and the odd call is number 2 is running very hot, and we expect to lose it. Now, inside the communications that they were having with ATC or ATC or departure, whichever one, they really can't deviate too much because they're on a standard instrument departure. There's aircraft behind them, so they can't make an immediate turn back. They got to run checklists. But the other part of it is they couldn't maintain more than 2,000 feet. And when you're in a situation like that, an aircraft of that nature, any change in the horizontal component of lift, meaning if you do a bank angle of a severe amount, is going to limit both your ability to climb, number one, and number two, it's probably going to decrease your airspeed if you have less than desirable power settings inside the aircraft. So it's a tough situation for the aircrew, right? Really tough, and they're really sticking to it. And if you listen to the guys on the radio, that they're calm, they're cool, they're collected, they're making their choices here. But this is where I find a little bit more of a fault with ATC, because generally, in that particular case, ATC would be remiss not to give you 100% of their intention. Okay, that would be.
Like, what do you need? Do you want to go back now?
Yeah,
what do you want to do?
And she does, but this other aircraft interfering kind of gets everything bunched up a little bit. And I bet you we're going to find something in the FAA report about that there's going to be some sort of interaction that they find there. And the other part about aviate, navigate, communicate, right? Well, obviously communication is the last part of that, but the most important thing is that you can't deviate unless you communicate and agree that you're having an emergency. And everyone thinks that once you declare an emergency, you get carte blanche, you get to do what you want, which is technically true, because if the aircraft is unflyable, that is something that you have at your disposal. But this is going to fall into a gray area. And I think you're going to see some things that might have to change as a result of it in what the FAA sees. And I don't know what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll take note, because again, I said some things before I watched, had listened to the tapes, because again, as you guys have down there, some links down there, you can actually watch some videos or listen to the actual audio. And as Mike said, the pilots seemed quite calm, and they actually even say where they're going to be going. They didn't actually ask to go back right away. They actually said, we'll go 220. And then, when they were going 220, even before they got acknowledgement from ATC, which is why ATC was a little bit, you could hear ATC's a little bit upset, like, why are you guys not doing what I told you? And then realized, okay, yeah, they're actually saying we have a problem. But anyway, so I'm also, as Mike said, I'm interested to see more about the report. And I know one thing you guys may remember when we did this video last time, not about emergencies, is we like to say, when things happen, when things go awry in aviation, we try not to encourage anyone to backseat quarterback,
Which
right?
we kind of are.
All we know is what we have here. We got the tapes, and we have some data of where the aircraft was and altitude and speed. We don't know anything else right now. We don't have the tapes from what happened in the cockpit, what the indications were. All we know is what we've presented to you guys so far. So it's always interesting to see what really goes on when the report finally comes out. We're obviously super happy that no one got fatally injured, and that they were rescued and all that. So that's always super important. But yeah, we're interested to see what the actual report says, to see if we can maybe pinpoint some more shed some more light on the aircraft itself. What happened on the flight deck? Because again, we are only speculating ATC now. Which we have some issues with the ATC, right? But I'm still interested to see what else is going on there.
To highlight some of the conversations that Corey and I also had prior,
But of course, Aviate.
Aviate, Navigate, Communicate, of course. But to highlight some of the conversations that we
always.
had before we jumped on this, which is, look, the Miracle on the Hudson and this have one thing in common. Most airlines do not practice double engine failure. It's one of those things that it's unprecedented. It generally doesn't happen. When it's so rare that it's taken, I think, what is it, 13 years since the previous event for it to happen again, or maybe even longer than that at this level.
Yep.
So there's a lot of that in this Honolulu incident that's going to be digested inside of air crews and how people train inside of simulators. But the other thing is that now, being dual rated, we could speak to two different areas, and I'm going to steal this from what Gozer had said, Corey had said earlier, which is
sure.
In a helicopter, the minute you have any indications that something is going wrong, it's almost an immediate, let's look for some place to land, which...
Well, you do aviate, right? You have to keep flying if it's a single engine aircraft, which you know we talked about earlier. If it's single engine, you have to, if you guys don't know, you have to lower the collective, maybe make some changes to the aircraft attitude, actually enter auto rotation so you have an aircraft fly still or glide. And then many times if the engine's completely out, then you're navigating immediately. And again, being dual rated, and Mike can chime in as well, it's a bit different, right? Because you talk about airlines with two engines or multiple engines. The fact that we said already that when you have double engine failure, double engine out at the same time, it's extremely rare, which is a good thing. Don't take note of that if you're thinking about, if you're not a pilot and you're kind of wondering what we're talking about. It's quite rare that both engines are out and the aircraft's now unable to maintain altitude. But yeah, it's something to say that if you got one engine out and you can troubleshoot it, you may have already seen articles, and I think maybe Mike, I don't know, maybe we've already covered somewhere, an aircraft lost an engine and then made it back to the airport. I know there's plenty of those.
Tons.
But I don't know if we've covered.
Yeah, it was the Denver one, the United crew making it back. Well, here's the other part. I mean, it's also not unheard of that air crews have shut down a good engine before.
Well, we mentioned that as well, and I don't know. Yeah, I don't know either. He said it's running hot. Then,
well, so here's the other.
Did he ever say in the video that we've lost both engines?
He did. I believe they did. The last call is the other one's running hot, but we can't maintain it. I believe he said finally, we're going to lose the other one, or alluded to. But then they got the call that they couldn't maintain altitude, and then ATC read back and said, I think it was an alert, altitude alert. You're descending below 2,000. Yeah. So the other part of that is, look. Then you're going to have to look at probably what's the other issue that would cause both engines to fail on the same aircraft, and whether it be a fuel issue, a fuel delivery system, onboard fire. There's many things that could have gone wrong to have led to that incident. So, again, can't speculate to that, because here's the good news.
Yeah.
Good news is Aviate, Navigate, Communicate, for the most part here, these guys actually, at night, performed a phenomenal, water landing, because if it was a water crash, they probably wouldn't be alive. So they were still able to.
This is at night too, off Honolulu. So they're landing a 737 with two people on board with cargo in the ocean.
Yes, at night.
And they both got out injured, but they both got out. So yeah.
So hats off to that air crew. But again, these are the things that the FAA are going to go back and look at, and I guarantee you in this particular case, we're going to find some sort of alteration at the level of, there's going to be something that they're say, well, do we really have to communicate that it has to be a full-blown emergency? What can we do besides just vectors at this point? Because these incidents are rare. The turnout was okay, but I'm sure we could still do better. And look, this also goes on to say that in what we're covering for the air taxi markets and everything else that happens, things will still happen. Engines will still fail. We'll talk about Alice and Aviations and what we had their critique about where they had their engines placed, because when this happens, you got to still maintain the aircraft. And if the aircraft's unable to actually physically fly, the flight crews have their hands very, very full in what they need to do to maintain the aircraft's airworthiness. So there's that.
Oh, yeah.
So, hey, folks, if you get a chance, you like what we have to say, like, subscribe, follow. We got a lot more to talk about. We appreciate, I think just the other day we were talking about 250 subscribers, and now we're at 263. It keeps growing in leaps and bounds. We couldn't be happier with the results that you, the YouTube audience, have bestowed upon us and that you keep finding what we do and you like it and you keep responding. So thank you so much for that. And we continue to bring you the best that we can. So, hey,